When I was a kid, I did a lot of things when I was a kid that landed me in trouble. Um, Getting in trouble though, it was. I can look back now and say those moments that I got in trouble for the things I did. It was really to keep me safe and to keep me alive until I'm as old as I am today. Um, Let me tell you one of those stories. I was probably middle school age. I can't really remember specifically, but we used to play with the kids across the street. Um, they had three boys, and it was me and my two sisters, so there were three and three, and we'd play all kinds of stuff. We'd go out there and we'd play hockey in the street hockey. We'd go watch Mighty Ducks and get all revved up and go out there in the street and play. And the car would come. We'd say game off. We got to move all the stuff out of the street and bring it back. And one time my sister actually slipped down one of the gutters in the street. She got going too fast and slipped down the gutter, and that happens. And so you just keep playing. And one of the guys slammed into one of the brick mailboxes, and he wasn't on my team, so we kept playing. And you just keep doing what you're doing because you're having fun. Well, there was one time we also made up this game that was basically hide and seek with bicycles that I don't advise at all because it was terrible and awful and bad things could have happened, but we had a lot of fun doing it. Well, at the end of the street, there was this, where the sidewalks came together, there was this little place where the sidewalk went up, and it was considerable height, and we used to ramp our bikes off of this thing. And so we'd go down there, and we'd ramp our bikes, and we'd do, whatever you can do, try to do tricks, you see. I mean, we didn't have YouTube back then, but you imagine in your mind. I know it's hard for some of you to imagine a time when there wasn't YouTube, but it didn't always exist. And so we would go, and we'd ramp our bikes and do our thing. And we had this idea because one of the guys who lived across the street, it was the Shapanskys. That's who lived across the street. And they got a scooter for Christmas. And this was going to be cool. And so they got a scooter. They're riding the scooter around. The rest of us riding our bikes. And we're trying to ramp. And the scooter didn't really ramp down on that cement deal because it was a little too high. And the wheels on scooters are smaller than the wheels on bikes. And so we got this great idea. We're going to build a ramp. And so we get some random spare wood that they had in their garage, and we find a hammer and nails. And, of course, our moms don't know about this. They're doing their thing, and we're out doing our thing. And so we build this ramp out there, and we put it in the sidewalk, and we start going off it in our bikes. We're going to test it with our bikes first. And, our bike wheels are big. They're like 2 feet in diameter. And so we're going off of this thing, and nobody's brave enough yet to try it with the scooter. And it's working with the bikes. It's staying together. It's not breaking. And so I grabbed the scooter and said, I'll give it a shot. But if I really would have stopped for a minute and thought about the process here. We built this ramp, and it was like a half-inch thick, maybe 3/4 inch thick. I mean, it wasn't tiny lip on this thing. And it was on the ground. And, of course, bike wheels, big, would be able to go up that lip, no problem. But scooter wheels are like this, right? And it's got that lip is like that. And if I really would have thought about it, I would have thought, this really is not going to work very well. But I didn't think about that because I thought, this is going to look really, really cool. And if we all had cell phones, we would have videoed this, and we would have been YouTube stars. We would have been trending in 5 minutes. But anyway, I back up the scooter about 2 or 3 houses because I want to get a good head start on this deal. And I get that scooter now, and I was about this height in junior high, okay? And you can imagine riding a scooter. Scooters are not made for people my size. And so I'm getting this scooter, and I'm going to town, and I'm gaining speed, and I'm looking at how cool this would be. And about the time I almost get there, I get to the Shapanskys' driveway, and I'm about to hit that scooter, and I think, this is not a great idea. And the scooter hits that ramp and doesn't move because it catches that lip, and the scooter stops, but I don't. And the scooter stops, and I go flying off of that ramp, and then I don't remember what happens next. I remember being on the ground, not being able to breathe, because it knocked the wind out of me, and I got up and ran into my house only to discover I had scraped up my face, scraped up my knees, scraped up my hands. I still have a scar on my shoulder from where the concrete scraped it. And ran inside and came back out and got doctored up by my mom. And by the time I came back out, the scooter was nowhere to be found. It had disappeared. The ramp had disappeared. The bikes had disappeared. And everybody was playing nicely basketball in their driveway. Apparently, I had gone rogue, I guess. But I should have known better. Oftentimes that's the theme of our lives. We should have known better. If I really would have thought about it for even half a second, I would have known that scooter wheel is too small for that giant ramp that we built. It's not going to work. But I think about it. I should have known better, but I didn't take the time to really process what was going on. Well, we're going to see today, we're going to see a situation where that is the case. They should have known better. We started a series of messages last week talking about who did Jesus come for. And we're taking our principal verse for this entire series from Acts chapter 1, verse 8. When Jesus told his disciples, last words on earth, you will be my witnesses when the Holy Spirit comes on you in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And last week we saw Jerusalem. Jesus came for us as individuals, for our individual area. And today we're going to look at Jesus coming for Judea and what that possibly might mean. And I'm just going to give you a preface to that. Judea was their particular region, and generally when they spoke about Judea, they talked about people kind of like them. People who were like them, people who thought like them, people who lived like them, people they interacted with, their friends and family, and that was who they thought about when they thought about their region of Judea. And now today we're going to be in Luke chapter 24. Luke 24, it's on page 885 if you're using the Bible on the rack. They're in front of you on the pew. It's also in the YouVersion Bible app. You can find the notes and scripture and devotions, as well as some of the songs and stuff we're doing in the service are there. You can find all of that in the Bible app under the events little button. But Luke chapter 24. Now, where we come here, as we're going to pick up the scripture down in verse 13, is Jesus has died. He died on a Friday. All his disciples have been around him for a couple years, and then all of a sudden Jesus dies. But something that the disciples forget, and we're going to see that today that they have forgotten, is Jesus told them repeatedly that he was going to die. He tells them as they turn and make their journey to Jerusalem, he says, we're going to Jerusalem because I'm going to get arrested, I'm going to die, but don't worry, I'm going to raise from the dead. So he tells them this over and over and over and over again. But then when it happens and he gets arrested and he gets crucified, the disciples freak out. They should have known better, but they forgot. And so this happens. Jesus dies on Friday. Saturday comes, nothing. Sunday comes, and they don't see him. They get word from some of the women who were disciples that there was an angel at the tomb, and they still begin to worry. We still haven't seen Jesus. And so some of them begin to get discouraged and go home. And that's where we pick up today in Luke 24, verse 13. Two of those disciples on their way home after this great disappointment of thinking Jesus was the Son of God, and then he dies. So Luke 24, starting at verse 13. That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking to each other about these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus drew near and went with them. So we've got these two people on the trip from Jerusalem to Emmaus, about 7 miles away, and they're headed home to Emmaus. And while they're talking about all the stuff that's happened, it said all the stuff that went on in Jerusalem, probably some of the memories they've had from the last couple years, and they're on the way, Jesus himself walks up to them. Jesus himself walks up, and verse 16 is key. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. So Jesus was there, Jesus was with them, but they didn't recognize him. That's often the case in our lives. We can be going through something, maybe a deep sadness, a deep grief, maybe a difficult situation, and Jesus is there, but sometimes we don't recognize his presence there with us. So these disciples are on their way back. They don't recognize Jesus. It says they're kept from recognizing him for a specific purpose. Verse 17, Jesus speaks. And he said to them, what is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk? And they stood still, looking sad. So they look sad. It's not just a looking sad. It is an external expression of how they're feeling on the inside. Their grief has welled up and it's showing on their faces. This guy who's approached them on the road says, "What are you talking about? Why are you saying the things that you're saying?" And they stopped in their tracks on the journey home, and their grief is visible. Their sadness is visible. Their heart is visible on their faces. So we know now how these guys are feeling. There's great disappointment in them. Remember, they thought Jesus was the Son of God, and then he died. And so it's all of that built up emotion over several years. They had put all their hope on Jesus, and now he's gone. And all that anticipated expectation had been eradicated on a Friday afternoon. And so they stopped. They looked sad. Verse 18, one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things have happened." So it says, we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. So they're expressing now all that hope that they had was gone. Their entire belief system that they were anticipating and looking forward to is gone. Now imagine that for you. What if your entire belief system was wrong? Or at least you think it's wrong. That's where they are in this moment. They're on a particular spiritual journey. They have forgotten that Jesus told them he was going to raise from the dead. And now Jesus, having died and risen from the dead, standing there talking to them, and they're expressing their disappointment in what they had expected of their hope. They had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel, not realizing that Israel has been redeemed because Jesus has risen and he's standing there before them. So we had hoped this was supposed to happen. Besides all this, it's been 3 days since it's gone down. Verse 22. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. I want you can see their disbelief in the women who went there in verse 23. It says they didn't find his body, so they came back saying that they saw a vision. Not saying that they did see a vision, not saying he believed they saw a vision. He says they said they saw a vision. They said they saw a vision. Great, good for you. I believe you totally. You went there, the body wasn't there, and then they returned and told us they saw a vision. He should have said they went there, didn't find his body, they saw a vision, and then they came back. But the order is important as well as the tense is important because these guys don't believe that the women saw a vision. Also because some of those guys who were there, we know it's Peter and John from another book of the Bible. Peter and John hear the women's report, run to the tomb, body's gone. They don't get to see the angels. They don't get to see a vision. And then they go home amazed and confused. And these guys decide, well, Jesus is dead. His body's gone. This whole thing we had built our lives around is over. And so they go home to Emmaus. Now look at Jesus' response to these guys, okay? Jesus does demonstrate great patience, but even in great patience, Jesus is very blunt. Verse 25. And he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets had spoken." Now back then, calling someone a fool was about as bad as you could get. That was about as bad as you could say to somebody. You called them a fool. That was the epitome of just saying you are the dumbest person on the face of the earth. And now Jesus is saying, you guys, you're fools. You're slow of heart. You have slow faith to believe all that the prophets have spoken. He's basically saying, why are you struggling when this thing was supposed to happen? And you knew about it ahead of time. You knew about it. The struggle that these guys were having and the fact that Jesus had died and they haven't seen him yet was causing them to doubt the faithfulness of God. They were doubting their faith here. Now, struggling with your faith and continuing to pursue God isn't a bad thing as long as you continue to pursue God. But what they're doing is they are not necessarily continuing to pursue God at all. They're walking away. They are lapsing in their pursuit, which is interesting. You see, though man's faithfulness may lapse, God's faithfulness never does. God cares for you even when you don't care for him. God will continue to pursue you and take care of you even when you don't walk after him. He still wants you to pursue him, and that's why he still pursues you. That's why Jesus here approaches these two guys on the road. This isn't some random thing that happens. He is looking out for the heart of these two men, and he goes after them on purpose to pursue them. He cares for them, even though in the moment they are doubting, they are lacking faith, they are despondent. He still loves them. Verse 26, Jesus still talking. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Now, he doesn't go into all the times that he told them specifically he was going to die and raise from the dead, because just they don't recognize him as Jesus, and they wouldn't have known how he knew that information. He just starts to walk through all the scriptures. It says all of them. All of them. With Moses, that's talking about the first 5 books of the Bible, and all the prophets. That's how they summed up the rest of the Old Testament. That's just a broad term they used for it. So he says he went through every scripture of the Old Testament on their 7-mile journey back to Emmaus. He gives them this great theological lesson about Scripture. Starts to walk through how Jesus had to be the Son of God because he fulfilled this prophecy and he fulfilled that prophecy and he fulfilled this prophecy. Walking through every time it's mentioned. And these guys, undoubtedly, their jaws are dropping wide open and think, of course, right. How do you even know all this stuff? We should know all this stuff from Hebrew school. This makes total sense. But he's still dead. Jesus walks them through the Scripture. Verse 28. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. And he acted as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." Now this verse is incredibly important. Jesus is going to walk on. He's done this before when he was walking on water. It was as though he were going to pass the boat, walk on past the boat. And why that's important is a very Jewish mindset, because God did that repeatedly in the Old Testament. He was going to walk past Moses on the mountain so Moses could see his glory. And so here we have Jesus doing the same thing. He's going to go on, but they begged Jesus to say, "Stay with us, stay in our lives, continue to be involved with us." And so he does. So he went in to stay with them. Verse 30. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. So again, they finally recognize that Jesus has been with them the entire time. Jesus has been with them the entire time, even as they were struggling, even as their grief was overpowering and coming out in their expression. I don't know if you've ever been around somebody who's incredibly sad or frustrated. Let's say, have you ever been, don't raise your hand, just mentally raise your hand. Let's say you've been at your house, in your home, and there's somebody, maybe you're married to, who is feeling particularly frustrated, and they're not telling you why. Can you sense their frustration? Maybe just in the hormones they're giving off. I know I act this way sometimes. You don't say it, but you can feel it, and you say, "Is something wrong?" "No, I'm fine. Everything's good. Praise Jesus." You know, you throw some scripture in there. But you can sense it. You can feel it. But even in the midst of these guys feeling what they were feeling, going through these massively deep emotions, Jesus was still with them. They just didn't see him. They didn't recognize him. They weren't focused on that. They weren't even looking for Jesus. Remember, they think Jesus is gone, that Jesus has abandoned them to death. And so they're not looking for him in their grief, in their struggle. They're not looking for him, but he's still there. They don't recognize him, but he's still there. When you're going through what you're going through, when that phone call comes this afternoon, or your thing happens at work tomorrow, and it's incredibly frustrating, it's incredibly irritating, maybe you're going to lose your job. Maybe something with health in your family is going to strike you this week. Jesus is still there. You got to see him. He's still there. Even if you don't see him, he's still there walking beside you through the mess. Even when you don't recognize it, Jesus is with you. And these guys finally recognize it. Verse 32. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us when he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the Scriptures?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. So they recognize Jesus and they go back home. Or they go back to Jerusalem. They were home. They go back to Jerusalem. That 7 miles they pack up and head back. You see, we see here who also Jesus came for. Jesus came for those who are nearby, who are like-minded. Jesus came for friends and family. Jesus came for people who should know. You see, because he came for these disciples who had heard repeatedly over and over and over again that Jesus was going to die and Jesus was going to raise. And even these guys who should have known the truth, Jesus came for them. He didn't make an assumption about their spirituality, their spiritual lives. Jesus went after them and pursued them and began a conversation with them about their spiritual journey. Jesus came for the shoulds. They should know, but do they really know? Do you really know that they know? Or do we simply assume oftentimes that some people know about Jesus? Oh, they know that I'm a Christian. They know that I go to church. I'll post a Bible verse once a week, or I'll do the Facebook check-in thing, and they'll see I'm at church, and they'll do the whole whatever. And so they should know about Jesus. And we never bring up the conversation. We never go there. We never talk about it. But we see Jesus didn't make the assumption with these guys, because he wanted to point them back to him. He could have just let these guys walk on to Emmaus and hear about it some other way. Eventually, word would have got to them, but that's not how it worked. He pursued them and went after them. Sometimes, though, when it comes to our own friends and family, we neglect to broach the subject on spiritual matters, either out of fear. We fear how they're going to see us, or if this will damage the family relationship or make Thanksgiving weird. Or we make an assumption about what they do know. Oh, they were raised in a Christian home. They were raised and they were taught all that stuff. They used to sing the Gaithers and they used to do all this stuff, and we talked about it all the time. And so they should know. We had the same grandparents. They should know about Jesus, but we still neglect to go there. We still neglect to talk about it because it's weird and we're family, and it would make it really awkward. And I don't like awkward. It's awkward turtle. It's on its back. Its legs are flailing. It just looks. What do? You help. You inject Jesus in the conversation, because eternity is worth more than assumptions. Eternity is worth more than assumptions. We can make assumptions about somebody's spiritual life all day long, but eternity is worth more than a momentary assumption, a momentary awkwardness. Eternity is too important to depend upon assumptions. Eternity can't be assumed. We can't assume somebody's eternity. Oh, they should know. They were sitting at the table at the other end when we were talking about church. Yeah, we didn't share the gospel or whatever, but we talked about church, and they should know what goes on at church. There's churches everywhere. They should know. But we're making an assumption about what they know and what they want to know and where their heart is. Assumptions don't guarantee eternity. We may think it will be awkward and weird, and I don't want to go there. I don't want to mess up, our limited time together. But awkwardness, an awkward moment, is temporary. Eternity is forever. An awkward moment is temporary. Eternity is forever. And oftentimes, the worst part is anticipating the awkward moment. Because once you enter into the awkward moment, it's only awkward for a second, and then you continue to move on. Anticipated awkward moments can have eternal impact if we involve Jesus. If we involve Jesus. And friends and family are some of the most difficult to reach. Because we've had all of these interactions, we've had all of these opportunities to say something about Jesus, and we never have. And then we die, and we go to heaven, having never broached the subject. I remember some years ago, before I was married, when you go on holidays to your grandparents' house, when you're not married and you're all still kids. I was the oldest of the grandkids. And the aunts and uncles and my grandparents all get their own bedrooms at Grandma's house. All the kids get shoved into one room. So that's the way it was. I remember this particular night. We were all staying at my grandparents' house in Denton, Texas. And all the kids were in one room, on the bed, on the floor, feet going into the bathroom because there's so many of you into one room. We're just all back there. And we're talking about a whole bunch of random stuff. I don't even know how we got there, but somebody started talking about church. And at that time, I knew for a fact 2 of my cousins in the room did not know Jesus. And we started talking about this stuff, and I could feel it. And some of you have felt it. You can feel when God says, okay, you need to say something. You need to say something right now. I'm giving you the open door. I have teed the ball up for you, put the bat in your hands. There's nobody in the outfield. You just got to swing. And we don't. But I felt it. And so I did. I went there. I shared the gospel. And laying next to one of my cousins, and I shared the gospel. And he didn't make a decision right then. And so I fell off to sleep thinking, well, that was a waste. I whiffed on the T-ball. Just missed that one. But I didn't miss. Because the next day, as everybody's packing up, loading up the car to leave, he grabbed me in the hallway of my grandparents' house and pulled me, and we stepped into the bathroom, and he said, I want to know Jesus you were talking about last night. And so right there in the bathroom at my grandparents' house in Denton, Texas, we prayed, and my cousin came to know Jesus. All because I took a leap of faith in the moment. It was awkward in the moment. We were in the same bed. And I'm sharing the gospel, and he's pretending to be asleep. Well, all right, I'll just roll this way. That's weird. But the awkward moment turned into eternal impact because Jesus was involved. Do we involve Jesus every day? Do we involve Jesus in our conversations? Should we involve Jesus? Jesus involved us. We see that with these 2 guys on the road to Emmaus. They are us. Walking about our day, doing our thing, going where we're going, following our checklist, sometimes talking about spiritual things, but not often in a positive light, going where we're going, and then Jesus involves us, and he injects himself into our situation. But then do we involve Jesus? Hashtag involve Jesus. Do we go there? These guys ended up, even though they didn't recognize Jesus, we see in verse 29, they wanted Jesus to be there. They said, will you stay with us? They were saying, Jesus, we want you involved. Even though we don't know a lot about you, even though in actuality, in the moment, they didn't recognize him, they were saying, we want you involved. They were involving Jesus in their situation. And when we involve Jesus every day, that can change how we see our journey. You see, they had arrived at their destination, not having realized Jesus was with them the entire journey. Jesus had actually interrupted their journey and talked with them and led them and guided them along the way, so that when they got to the destination and they finally recognized Jesus was with them, they realized when they got up and went back to Jerusalem that the interruption was more important than the destination, because the interruption was Jesus. Sometimes the point of the journey is the interruption, not the destination. Even though the interruption in the moment, sometimes for some of us who are very OCD and we've got to get through our checklist and we've got to get through our schedule and we don't like interruptions. This is a confession time. Maybe none of you are like this. That's me. And the interruption can be frustrating. We got to do it and we got to get there and we got to go and we got to do this. I remember one time I was a youth minister, planned this big, elaborate mission trip. It was in America. We called it the Great Mission Race. We went across 6 states, went to 13 cities in 8 days, and did mission projects in every city. And we had planned this thing, we had arranged all the specific places in all these specific cities. And what's even funny it's not funny. It's God. This was what year is this? 2018. This was like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I actually drove through DeQueen on our journey, on our mission race back then, before I'd even heard of DeQueen. But anyway, so we were driving all these places, and I was on the team. I had planned this as the youth minister, and the group who was with me, it was some of the interns. We would go in advance to the city we were going to spend the night at and get everything ready for when the vans arrived. And the kids who were on the different vans, they had assignments, and they would get to a city in the morning and do a project for half a day and then drive for 90 minutes or so, and then to another city and then do a project and then drive to where we were spending the night, get up the next day and do it all over again. And we did it for 8 days. And so we'd made all these phone calls and arranged all these projects, and when they got to the cities, inevitably, they would get there late. And it's because they would get distracted, or they would see something on the side of the road and they'd want to go and help, or they'd get stopped filling up the gas tank and spend 2 hours at the gas station. And so I'm getting phone calls from some of these places they're supposed to meet up and saying, where are the people at? And then I'm calling the van saying, where are you? You're supposed to be there. You're freaking me out. And they say, oh, well, we stopped this person and shared the gospel. Oh, okay, great. And so I'm thinking, I'm just confessing to you, in my OCD, I'm thinking, you're supposed to be there. You got to be there. You got to do this. But they had a greater spiritual impact stopping and embracing the interruption than they did focusing on the destination. And actually, in talking to those kids, years after that great mission race, it was often the interruptions that were more memorable than the destinations. And that's true, actually, oftentimes when it comes to your own kids. You can think about that, too. There was a time several years ago, Katie had taken, this was before we had Hope, and Liam was just a couple months old. I think Reagan was like 2.5 and Caleb was 4. And they had gone to meet one of Katie's friends and then gone to meet her aunt for lunch at this new area. And then they were going to get home. As you know, if you've got little kids, you want to get them home because you got a schedule. And they got to get a nap. Because if they don't have a nap, everything goes crazy, and that goes crazy for you, and the nighttime comes, and you're just exhausted, and you wish the world would end. And so, Katie's got it. We got to get the lunch, and we got to go home and get all 3 of the kids down for a nap. Well, as she's talking with her aunt, the kids want to go play. There's a nearby playground, so they go to play in the playground. But right next to the playground is this like splash park, spray park. It's like concrete and it's shooting water up, and the kids want to do that. And Katie said, no, we don't have any swimsuits. We don't have any towels. Y'all would be sitting in your car seats all wet, and it would be a mess because then I'm spending all afternoon washing car seats. No, we're not doing that. So go play on she said it nicer than that. That's the way I would say it. But so they go and they play on the playground. Well, this playground isn't like your typical playground. It's right next to some volleyball courts. And what the people who made the playground decided to do is instead of putting the bark chips or the little gravel over there, they put sand in all of it. Sand on the ground. The playground is in sand and the volleyball courts are in sand. It's just one big sand pit. And Katie said she looked over there and saw they had found some buckets, and they were just pouring sand on each other's heads, down each other's shirts. It went in each other's pants. It's all in their shoes. I don't even see your shoes. They're in the sand somewhere. And so there's sand and so now they're sand bodies. And so she says, okay, now you can go play in the splash park. And so they're running. I've seen the picture. We've got the pictures of them running around the splash park in their shorts and their shirts, and they're getting all baggy and falling down because, they're just regular shorts and they're getting all wet. And so they get back in the car after this. They'd been there 3 hours longer than they had anticipated. But the kids had a blast. It was the best day in the world. So she strips them down to their skivvies, and they're in the car. She didn't even have any towels. She had to dry them off with burp rags from the baby. That's all they had. So you know how far that went. And so they get home, and she gets them all bathed, and I come in after work, and we start to get dinner ready. And this is one of my favorite pictures of the boys so far, is sitting at the dinner table. The boys are sitting there, and we're in the kitchen, and they're waiting for us to bring their dinner to them. And Reagan is, I don't have a chair, but he's sitting at his chair, waiting for his food. He's got his pacifier in, and he's just falling asleep like this. And so I made the comment, it must be a good day if you can fall asleep at dinner waiting for the food to get there. You see, the interruption for the day turned out to be the best part of the day. It wasn't necessarily getting home and getting the nap. It wasn't even the lunch at the new restaurant. It was the interruption was the best part. And that's what we see with these guys on the road to Emmaus. The interruption was the best part. The interruption sometimes is the point of the journey. Sometimes the destination has nothing to do with the reason you set out on the journey. It's all about the interruption. But too often we ignore the interruption. We get frustrated by the interruption. We don't realize that Jesus may be standing in the middle of the interruption, and he wants us to embrace him in the moment. So what has interrupted your day? What has interrupted your life that looks to be an obstacle, that looks to be a point of frustration? But Jesus wants to use to guide your life in a new direction. Maybe the interruption hadn't hit yet, and it's coming. I want you to keep your eyes out and recognize Jesus when he arrives in the midst of the interruption. We need to recognize that he came for those who should know better, and that even when Jesus interrupts those who should know better, us, there will come a day where we all have that moment. We should embrace the interruption. But if you should know better, oftentimes we don't even know in the first place. I can tell you some of my own family members, there have been times that we made assumptions, but in actuality, they didn't know about Jesus. So you got to have the conversation. So who is it in your mind right now? Maybe Jesus has already put somebody there that you don't want to even think about yet. Say, man, I don't want to have that conversation. I know where it's going to end. I know how it's going to go. I do not want to end up blocked on Facebook. I do not want this to go in a bad way. I do not want the awkward moment. And you're trying to ignore it, and you're trying to think, is there somebody else I can talk to? Is there somebody else I can go to? Is there somebody else? But maybe God's already put that name with you. He's already embedded it in your heart, and he's saying, that is where I want you to go with this. Involve Jesus in the awkward moment and turn it into eternal impact. But if you've never been involved with Jesus, it will be hard for you to involve Jesus in the life of somebody else. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to believe. You've got to ask Jesus what they asked. Will you stay with me? You have to believe that Jesus is God's son. You have to believe that Jesus died so that all the bad things you've ever done or will ever do are forgiven. And then you have to believe that Jesus rose from the dead so that you can live after death. And if you believe those three simple statements, you gain heaven for all eternity. And nothing you do tomorrow can undo what he did 2,000 years ago. It's already been done. It's already been paid for if you simply believe and involve Jesus for the first time in your life today. And then you can begin to involve Jesus in the lives of those around you. Jesus came for your friends and family. Jesus came for the people in your direct circle of influence. Jesus came. Jesus placed you in the family you're in with the friends you've got to involve him in their lives. Will you involve Jesus in your life and in theirs?